Well, greetings, friends, and welcome to the Regenerative Agriculture Podcast. On this show, we explore the science of growing exceptional crops, and we work to describe why you have crop challenges and possible disease and insect pests, fruit quality challenges, and how you can resolve them. Our goal is to give you really clear and understandable information that you can put into action to help you grow better crops, grow healthier, higher quality food, and be more successful as a farmer. Many farmers have challenges. They have a desire to grow healthier, higher quality food, and then be compensated for producing healthier, higher quality food, which is sometimes a challenge in the agricultural marketing sector as it exists today. In this episode of the show, I'm excited to welcome Matt Kleinhenz from Ohio State University. Matt is a professor of horticulture and crop science and is very interested in understanding the dynamics of produce quality and food quality, and then how that also connects to buyers in the marketplace. So Matt, we're very excited to have you join us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
So Matt, you've done a lot of interesting work over your decades at Ohio State University and before. What are some of the memorable moments that have brought you to the spot where you are today and the various projects that you're working on?
Some of the most memorable moments specific to my career really spring from or involve interactions with growers and other members of the industry that brought to me a question or an issue that they wanted some input on. And after some lengthy discussion or experimentation or reaching out to other experts, we discovered that there may be a partial solution or at least a way forward to reach a solution. And the questions ranged, in this case, they often focused on how to produce more of a better quality product, mainly to satisfy, their customers, but also perhaps a larger aim.
So when growers are expressing the desire to produce a higher quality product, is that demand often coming from buyers? Is that demand coming from perhaps an altruistic sense that the grower has of producing healthier food? What drives the desire to produce higher quality?
In my experience, John, it's been both. Sometimes the grower has their own view, of course, their own ethic, their own aspirations, and they simply see themselves as being part of a much larger picture to enhance people's health and well-being through the quality of the material that they would supply. In other cases, if you will, it's a little bit less altruistic. It has a business sense behind it, and there may have even been complaints about the quality of the product or questions about the quality of the product or questions about how can it be improved. And so they're responding to a real business need, if you will.
When growers have a desire to improve quality, one of the questions that comes to mind as we're thinking about this and talking about this is what defines quality in their mind? What are they, and possibly there are some variations from crop to crop, but in general, what do you see growers seeking to produce?
It's a great question, and I've been privileged to try to address that question in different settings through the years, one-on-one conversations much like this, but also in a group setting, maybe even as a person that was asked to come in and comment to a select committee, if you will. But and the answers have been different, and we typically start with establishing, at least for the immediate conversation, what quality is or how it's defined in the eyes of that particular person or group. Because it has physical components, it has chemical components, it has biological components, and these various components or properties essentially define the whole or describe the whole, right? But they may be focused on one particular property. It might be the shape, the size, the texture, the aroma, the flavor, the color, what have you. They may be looking at one particular property or component, and necessarily so, but really that's difficult, perhaps even unwise, to separate it from the whole of the product, if you will, unless there's a very, very specific application in mind. So I would say that there is rarely one particular component or property that is common to all of a particular grower group or industry group. It's ranged, but over that time, it has covered, at least as far as I can tell, a very large number of properties that we look at in our fruits and vegetables, especially our fruits and vegetable crops.
Recently, I've been a part of a number of conversations where growers are expressing the desire to improve the nutritional value. Sometimes they use the language of nutrient density and talk about to improve nutrient density of food. And my observations have been that for the most part, the consumers at this stage and buyers aren't really having a conversation, at least not on a large scale, about nutrient density. That in general, kind of the analog that they're really looking for, that might be an appropriate analog for that would be flavor and aroma. What have you observed, and do you think there is the potential in the future to have a major market demand for quote unquote nutrient dense foods?
Let me let me get to that very significant question last, if we will, and maybe break up the response here, John, into a couple of different parts. First of all, nutritional value or nutrient density is a significant passion of mine, and I know it's a significant passion for other investigators that I work with. Some of whom are not, if you will, in the so-called public light as an extension person or as a grower advisor, but they're working tirelessly and quite impressively towards a similar goal, but within their lane, if you will, regarding understanding what nutritional value is and how it can be enhanced. So it is a big passion of mine. To the second part of your question, or second part of the question, I think we need often to be very specific when we talk about nutritional value, nutritional density. It's a complex topic, and we don't wave our hands and say, well, just because it's complex, we can't understand it, or we shouldn't approach it. No, quite the opposite. We should stay on task. We should continue to focus on how a farm can become an instrument of public health, if you will, producing a more nutritious product, a more so-called nutrient-dense product, a more flavorful product, a product that is more desirable to eat simply because of its chemical, biological, or physical properties. These are all parts of the process, in my view, towards the produce that we offer to folks playing a larger role in their maintaining or enhancing their quality of life, especially through their health status. To the final point, will there be a market? Will there be a time when more people are paying more attention to this aspect? I think so, but we're not there yet. I think that interest already is strong within a small, if you will, community of eaters or community of buyers. And where there is those so-called beachheads, where there are those loci of interest, there can be growth, right? So whereas now here in 2018, we might say, if we were able to do a grand survey, 0.5% of people make decisions around nutritional value. Some years down the road, we might be able to say it's 5% or 10%. And in that increase, there will be so many opportunities for enterprising growers to be a part of that process that it will become that much more noticeable.
As I think about the question of quote unquote nutrient density, it seems to me that there are perhaps a couple of different frameworks that people are using to think about this. On one hand, there is a conversation about food biofortification, growing specific plants that have higher concentrations of needed vitamins or minerals that are needed by a specific portion of the population, and growing biofortified foods that can really help supply those nutritional requirements. Then there is a second conversation happening around foods and crops that have inherently high nutrient density by default, such as blueberries or kale, for example. And then there is a bit of a third conversation happening that believes that we have lost substantial nutrient value in kind of all crops generally across the board over the last 40, 50, 80 years, whatever time frame here in North America. In particular, I've seen this conversation come up quite regularly. What is your perspective, particularly on this latter piece? Is there evidence to support that we have lost a lot of nutrient density in our food supply?
Well, it's possible. As a matter of fact, I had a very lengthy conversation on the very same topic just 2 days ago with another grower and members of the farm's team, and they asked the very same question. Is there evidence that we've lost nutrient value over time, particularly within, if you will, our fruit and vegetable crops, our specialty crops, and my area of focus is vegetables. So forgive me if I happen to focus primarily on those as examples. It's just because I'm more familiar with them as organisms and as products and as experimental subjects and so forth. So the vegetable crops tend to be where I turn my focus in conversations like these. But I'm aware that the picture is much larger. It involves, obviously everything that we could eat and can eat. So I know that there have been reports suggesting that is the case, that the nutrient density of the U.S. food supply, or perhaps global food supply, has declined over a number of decades. I have no reason to question those reports at this point in time, but I also have no reason to go out and shout from the rooftops that the sky is falling. I think the devil is in the details, if you will, if I could use that phrase. As an academic and an investigator, and also hopefully an educator and consultant advisor, I have to be very, very clear on on the source of the information, how the information was developed, and how it's being communicated, and what it could mean. And so I look at the reports, I look at the data, and I say, well, that might be the case, and there are pretty understandable reasons for that. I'm not justifying it as a trend. I'm saying, look at what has happened over the last 50 to 80 years in our food supply, and the way we provide it, and what people consume and what they expect of it. It can't be seen as a separate phenomenon from how we've taken on, our day-to-day lives. Okay. And as I think, as we began this conversation, how we've gone about our day-to-day life and what that means to individual growers. Okay. Growers respond to what the market asks them. They are business people par excellence, most of the time. They're working, I don't need to tell anybody on this call what it means to be a grower, but and what the forces that they face, but they're responding. One of those forces that they face is the demand. What does the market demand? And if the market has not demanded nutritional value, does not reward them financially for it, but instead rewards them for abundance, for consistency, for other attributes, that is what they're going to provide. And who should fault them? So, yeah, I guess I'll leave that part of the question. There were other parts of that same, the biofortification piece, and whether or not there are products that are inherently more nutritionally dense than other ones. We can return to those if you like, or we can move on.
Well, the follow-up question that I would have to your response, and I absolutely agree that growers are responding to the market, and of course this is because not just because of buyer demand, but perhaps also because of the mantra that has been adopted by the agriculture industry as a whole for the need to quote unquote feed the world, and that has been a kind of a subconscious driving force, I would expect, for many growers that has, and then of course you have the economic incentives, which are a major primary incentive to incentivize growers to produce large volumes and abundance, perhaps at the expense of quality and perhaps not.
Yeah, this is maybe a section when I push back just a tiny bit. I'd say, and it's just a conversation among friends here. I'd say that in an individual grower's decision on how they approach the management of their farm and their crops, of course I can't climb inside somebody's head, but what I've observed over the years is that they have their farm and their own personal welfare in mind first, the health of the industry second. And they have to have a hierarchy. They have to have priorities. And what I've seen is we don't point necessarily finger at the industry and say, well, this is where the industry has led us or taken us. No, these are day in, day out, season in, season out decisions that a grower makes regarding what they grow, who they sell it to, and what price are they receiving, and what is required to make it all work. And little by little, farm by farm, region by region, if you will, industry by industry. One could look at the cabbage industry or the lettuce industry or, various industries. They're not monolithic. There's quite a diversity within each. But you say, look at them farm by farm, area by area, and you say over time, generational transfer, over time, people have chosen to respond to the opportunities that so far, on the whole, do not reward producing less but of higher nutritional value, simply because, I would say, the math is not in their favor. On the whole.
Exactly.
There just aren't enough people that will pay more for the same product if it's claimed to be more higher nutritionally dense than the product that's not, because they're responding to their pocketbook, right? So if I go to the farmer's market and I have a head of lettuce that looks in every way identical to the one that my neighbor and competitor has on display, and mine is twice the cost, but it looks in every way the same, but I try to make a claim that it is more nutritionally dense, how many customers will I have that walk away having given me bought the product? Moreover, what evidence will I provide that my claim is true? And on what will I base it? We talk about nutritional value as if it is one thing. It is most certainly not one thing. There are many components of nutritional value, but most of the time the conversations speak of it as if it is eye color. It's not. It's a very complex attribute of a food item, and I think to understand it fully and its origins fully, like how is it shaped, one needs to really study it and be prepared to adopt, at least temporarily, some reductionist thinking, and then reassemble all pieces that come from that reductionist thinking into something that's more holistic.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and I think we are saying the same things. And this is, I believe, this entire conversation has been one area of confusion, particularly within the organic industry. And I'm certain that many of the growers who are listening are not necessarily organic, but it seems every several years, there is an industry report that gets published saying that organic foods have been discovered to not be any more nutritious than conventional foods. And then a short while later, there's a rebuttal from the organic industry that, in fact, organic foods are supposedly more nutritious than conventional foods. And this is kind of this back and forth that has been happening for quite some time. I've seen the cycle repeat itself multiple times. And yet, when you stop to think about it, organic certification has no parameters for nutritional quality. It does absolutely nothing to certify the quality of the end product in terms of nutritional value or otherwise. It is purely a process certification that says a certain process was used that hopefully should substantially reduce the number of toxins and pesticides that might be on the food supply. It makes no reference to quality, and so I think, or to nutritional value. And so I think there's this conversation happening around nutritional value that really has no basis in the regulations or in the certification process, which I find to be an intriguing conversation. But I'd like to switch gears for just a bit, Matt, and I'd like to ask you the question, in all the work that you've done, working with growers, working with various crops, what has been the one thing that has really puzzled you for a long time?
Goodness gracious. There are, a number of things have puzzled me, but I don't mean to respond with humor. It's not a derisive laugh. It's a laugh born of the memory of so many mind-blowing conversations that I've been fortunate to have with people, in which I've learned so much through those conversations, but I've also been dismayed, if you will, by some of the lack of understanding that folks sometimes exhibit around the crops that they grow, basic biology. And I wonder, how would one practice medicine without knowing anatomy? How would one practice law without knowing basic precepts? How would one be a plumber and not know, lefty loosey, righty tighty? How would one be as effective as they possibly could be at their chosen profession without a firm grasp of what I would call some of the basics. And what I've noticed is the capacity for people to produce a lot of material because they follow a process, but in that process, they don't know the finer points of the process, nor the finer points of the organism that's at the central part of it. And so it's almost as if they're succeeding thanks to the process that was laid out for them by others, not because they have an in-depth understanding of the crop. And occasionally that lack of understanding leads them to a problem that befuddles them, and it holds them back. It may even undercut their income. And of course, understandably, they get confused, frustrated, so forth. And in some cases, the answer is right before them, if only they had understood a little bit more about their crop. And so, yeah, I guess the one thing that confuses me or has struck me is, if you will, the lack of understanding of certain basics around each of the crops that they grow.
Matt, this is an incredibly important piece, and I had no idea how you would answer this question, but this is, I've been chuckling to myself because this is something that we have observed as well quite frequently in our consulting work. And in areas where crop production has become more intense and more competitive, where crops are managed very intensely and margins become a lot tighter, risk becomes a lot higher, it is almost invariably these growers that don't have the foundational knowledge that end up not surviving for whatever reason. It might take a few years, it might take a decade, but invariably it does seem that these are the growers that don't survive in the long term. And so the question that I would have for you is, following up to that, is from your perspective and observation, what are the important pieces that you would recommend that growers should study and should become really familiar with?
Great question. And I'd like to hasten to add that, the understanding that I spoke about earlier, it can come from many different places. And I'm sure that people listening appreciate the different ways of knowing, the different ways of coming to understand something as complex as, lettuce growth or tomato growth or what have you. Different ways of knowing. And in my baseline, my kind of constitutive, always on way of thinking is that to employ more of them leads to a better outcome. So to your question about pieces, what are the important pieces? I would include in that, obviously what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, the business of farming, the process of farming. Take notes, observe, take notes. If a camera is an option, take pictures, record. In downtimes, when there are any, in downtimes, study those notes, look at those pictures, think about what was going on at the time. Install ways of collecting more information. People say, well, what can I do in that way? Well, there are very simple devices to record temperature. One can measure, obviously, rainfall and so forth. Flow meters on the irrigation. There are steps that can be taken that will describe their system, if you will, to them for themselves and maybe even for others, that will provide very important bits of information. And in the process, they've not changed really anything about their farming practice. They simply know more about it, actually. And soil testing would be another obvious example. Because if at some point they need to turn to somebody else for input, maybe somebody like me or you, we value that information. I'll say myself, I value that information. I'd say, boy, if I had more input, if I had more data, so to speak, if I had more information, I could help you. I could be more effective at helping you. So that's one piece. Just observe, take notes, record as much as is reasonable, and be strategic about it. The second part would be read, listen. If videos are an option for you, watch credible ones. Be healthily skeptical of what you're seeing and reading. Don't accept 100% at face value just about anything, but don't be so skeptical that you accept nothing. Be an informed consumer of information. And as you deal with the confusion that can come with that healthy skepticism, there still will be growth. And I think in the long run, the quality information rises, and then you can rely on it. It could be put to better use. So I'd say employ as many ways of knowing as a person can consistently, and just begin with the simple ones. Take notes, record, take pictures, and go over them, and in your spare time, do some reading.
Matt, your comments bring so many thoughts to mind. I have a few to share. I'll perhaps begin with a quote from William Albrecht that comes to mind. He, in one of his articles, he wrote the quote, "Read books and study nature, and when the two don't agree, you throw out the books." And I think, of course, there's an element of humor in that, but the fundamental, I think that perhaps encapsulates a bit of what you're describing, and kind of the foundational piece. If you want to read books and study nature, and then when the two don't agree, throw out the books. In order to be able to throw out the books, that means you need to have very high quality observation, and which goes to the point that you were making, is observation is absolutely key in being able to understand what's going on.
Absolutely. Through those observations, one might be able to write their own book, right? That maybe somebody later will throw away, or maybe not. Maybe that book will remain, quite viable and informative for a very long time. So, yeah, absolutely. There is. I don't want to say there's a lifetime to all information, so much as there is a lifetime to how it is applied in certain ways. And what we see, I think, in the evolution of understanding of people's business is their change in what information they rely on or seek. Okay, as they become more proficient at certain areas of their business, they no longer need certain types of input as dramatically as they may have needed, some years before. And simultaneously, they're seeking out other types of input. So if we boomerang back, John, just for a real quick second, we boomerang back to the question of nutritional value. They could begin with, okay, well, what is nutritional value anyway? How would a dietitian, nutritionist, a health professional define it? Not as it's being defined by people who are recycling information. I want to go to the primary source and ask, well, what do they do with it? Well, there are people, professionals of one stripe or another, that have written some very impressive, provided some very impressive resources on nutritional value of various food items. And learning from that primary source can be enormously important. So to bring this back, ways of knowing about the farm, what to do with one's soil, what to do with one's whatever, aspect of the farming operation. If one looks for input and doesn't find it, that's a cue on something. That's a clue that maybe it's not been investigated, maybe it's not been written about, and so they are at the so-called cutting edge of understanding it.
One of the pieces that we've observed in working with growers, we've observed one characteristic of growers that are exceptionally successful that has really stood out, which is these most successful growers seek to understand. The answer to the question is, how do you make money? How do they make money? And so if for many, particularly for fruit and vegetable crops, as you mentioned at the beginning, oftentimes the key to having a successful, profitable crop is some quality component, whether it might be fruit size or fruit shape or a specific firmness. There are often very specific fruit characteristics or vegetable characteristics that are desired by the market. And one of the things that we've observed is that the most successful growers seek to understand that specific characteristic and how to manage it. They don't delegate that piece to an agronomist or a consultant or an advisor. They want to understand if the key to having a profitable tomato crop is having a high soluble solids content, what are the specific components and factors that contribute to achieving a high percentage of soluble solids. So they focus in on that piece specifically, and they want to make sure that they personally understand that very deeply. They don't delegate that knowledge. And so I think this speaks to this entire conversation of what are the important pieces for us to learn about as growers. I think really understanding the pieces that contribute to profitability can be a very valuable place to begin.
No question. I agree with you completely. They don't delegate. in part because consciously or subconsciously they recognize that quality is the target. In my perspective, quality is the platform for repeat sales. One might be able to make the initial sale based on some other factor, but the repeat sale comes from the quality as one enormously influential component of the overall value that the buyer sees in the product. Of course, there's a price quality interaction, but one never really wants to be racing for the bottom price, do they? In that scenario, quality has diminishing. The importance of quality is diminishing, and as the price rises, the value of quality in that calculation in the buyer's mind increases. So, my argument has been, you want a better price, raise the quality. Improve the value of the transaction that you're trying to consummate with the buyer by offering them something in return that is going to prompt them to give you more money for the product. And as far as ways of knowing, and I'm many on this. So if one goes to the produce auction and they see what's being bought, what the prices are, that is immediate feedback on what sells and what does not sell. Correct? I mean, there's no more dramatic demonstration than at the farmer's market on Saturday, or at the produce auction, or wherever one can see another person's product and what is being sold, purchased, and what price. And to be a student of that transaction, I think, is one way of improving one's operation. Understand why yours was purchased or not, and understand why it got the price that it did, and how it could possibly go higher. And in as much as quality is a force in that, understand what the buyers are responding to. It could be the color, it could be the shape, it could be the consistency, whatever it is. Remember those physical, chemical, biological components of it. If it happens to be nutritional value, or the holistic expectation that the buyer has about it enhancing their diet, if in some way, study it and understand the origin. And I know that bricks, or total soluble solids, is on many people's minds, but bricks is not a nutritional component. It has little bearing on nutrition specifically. Nutrition, as people who study nutrition for a living define nutrition. Bricks has other implications, but they rarely include nutrition specifically. And so, as I say, be a student of it, and agreeing with you completely. The grower rarely delegates what's most important, because it tends to be something they want to have more control over, be more informed about. And in the case of quality, it's often the target of what they're trying to produce.
Matt, what do you believe to be true about agriculture today that many other people don't believe to be true?
Well, I hear from so many people, and I hear so many different perspectives on agriculture. I hear that it's going to heck in a handbasket. I hear that it's enjoying a complete revitalization, and everything in between. So I hesitate to point to one area and say, oh, this is something that people don't believe to be true. But I would say that there are areas or topics that I hear about less than other areas, and I would say one of those that I hear less about, that I'm not sure if people more widely appreciate, is what role the grower plays in our culture, in our society, and in our daily life. Right? They're part of a fabric that is ensuring our access as consumers to healthy, nutritious, safe, and enjoyable to eat, pleasing to eat food, day in, day out, meal in, meal out. They're kind of like this background group of folks that many in the population take for granted. That's unfortunate, but there are probably a number of reasons for that. So what do I believe to be true? They're often underappreciated, underrecognized, but they keep on going, just like we hope that they do, and have done for so long.
So within that, obviously you've thought about this a little bit. You believe that growers are underappreciated, which I absolutely agree with. Have you given any thought to how that might be remedied?
Well, I think not to share an unpopular idea, but I think they need to ask more of themselves. And I also think that they could benefit from being a bit more assertive professionally in about what they do, how and why, and what role they play. It's obviously, there are, John, there are, dozens of possible responses to that. Some people will become activists, if you will. Some people will become involved in grower organizations. Some people will keep it one-on-one and simply have, excellent conversations with their buyers on Saturday mornings or wherever they happen to encounter them, all of which are necessary. But on the whole, I would encourage folks to use the opportunity to display their understanding of the farm's role and the food's role in that person's life, because a lot of our eaters more or less just eat to avoid being hungry, right? Which is entirely fine. It's a choice. Others, though, look to food for other types of, if you will, return on investment. It's an enjoyable experience. So when a grower encounters a person or a market that might be wired that way, might be thinking of food differently, if you will, having higher expectations of it, ideally, I'd like the grower to be able to step up and say, yeah, this is what we do and how and why, and have data, okay? Have a real foundational argument for whatever it is, assertion that they would like to make. But, a lot of us, understandable, a lot of us are on the farm doing our thing and being out and about and mingling with the masses, if you will, is not necessarily their forte or interest. But there are other ways of having an impact and playing a role.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you've described. And one of the pieces that really stands out for me is those growers who have been able to really make an impact in my observation with consumers and with eaters are those growers who communicate why. They communicate why they make the choices that they make and the decisions that they make. There certainly is an element of describing what they do and how they do what they do. But I think the most, from my observation, the most important piece that resonates most deeply with eaters is kind of describing why you need to make these various decisions and these various choices that the consumer may or may not necessarily agree with. But when you describe the situation of what's happening and why you need to make these choices, their appreciation for the challenges and the difficulties and the opportunities in agriculture completely changes.
Yeah, so we want to be careful here. We want to elevate as much as possible the position of the grower within the whole spectrum of our society and our culture, and we want them to be successful. I would say, thinking more about your question, the single most common source of struggle that I've seen over the years begins with the grower looking at their product only as a farmer, unable to see it in a more comprehensive way, but most especially as the buyer sees it. That's what I've observed is, attitudes like, well, if I eat it, everyone else should be able to eat it too. Or if it's acceptable to me, why isn't it acceptable to you? It isn't, it's rarely expressed that way, but that's the attitude. And when a grower is able to completely see the product from completely the other side of the table, shed their grower, if you will, as much as possible, shed their grower attitude temporarily and see the product as if they're buying it for how it's going to be used by the buyer, then they're on, I think, a really exciting path to looking differently at their own farm and possibly being able to exploit market opportunities that they didn't see before. That's the single most consistent aspect of a vegetable farm now, especially a vegetable farm that might be selling directly to consumers or some sort of bar, but even those who grow for processors.
That's a fascinating observation. I love it.
They need to see it as the buyer does, and unequivocally so, without reservation, not kicking and screaming. No, welcome the opportunity to see the product as the buyer does. You will return to being a farmer, no worries. But when you return to being a farmer, hopefully you carry that experience of seeing the product differently with you, and all of a sudden for some it'll be like, actually, I'm not producing kale, I'm producing food that somebody's going to serve at a family function, and it's got to be just so. They see it as kale, or they see it as this or that, or tomato. We do these exercises with students in my class, where I hand them a tomato or I hand them a potato, and I say, tell me what you see. And everyone looks at me funny. I'm like, no, tell me what you see. And we're not, and you'd be amazed by the kinds of words that are used to describe ordinary products. But in that comes the discussion, okay, now we're on a path towards understanding what that tomato is. And if you go through that same exercise, for example, like I have with students in the dietetics nutrition arena versus the students in the agriculture arena, it's amazing how they look at the same thing and use different words to describe it. And so to a grower, to understand how others see the product, is indispensable.
That's such a fascinating observation, and I'm smiling to myself because I'm recalling a farm that a colleague of mine worked on a number of years ago, and it was a large commercial farm growing salad greens and in particular lettuce. So they had a couple of different lettuce fields that were affected by a major hailstorm within about 8 or 10 days of harvest. And as they were visiting these fields, when they visited the first field to kind of inspect and evaluate the damage, my friend asked the grower, when you think of this field of lettuce, what does it mean to you? And what do you think of? And why are you growing lettuce? And the grower's response was, well, I'm growing lettuce. My goal is to have 800 cases per acre. And when I think of it in my mind's eye, I see it as 800 cases packed in the cooler, ready to ship out and I want to get a good price for it so that I can be profitable to keep growing this crop again in the future. They went to the second field, and the second field had very similar damage, almost the exact same amount of hail damage. And my friend asked the grower, he said, now, when you think of this field of lettuce, I want you to not think about this in terms of profitability and cases of lettuce in the cooler, but instead, I want you to imagine and visualize a young family with a couple of young children sitting down to eat dinner, and they are having a salad that is made with your lettuce. And so they were just having this conversation, talking about this. And I know I'm probably going out on a limb here quite a bit, but there was this intriguing crop response that when they evaluated the two fields, the amount of hail damage when it was observed within a few hours after the hailstorm was virtually identical in the two fields. Two crops have been the same variety, planted the same day. But when they went to harvest, the first field, they only had about a 20% harvest because of all the hail damage. The second field, where the grower had a different mental image of the crop that he was producing, they had an 80% yield. So tremendously different response from the plants in the field. Now, I know this is pretty far out there. Did those plants respond to a different mental image of what they were being produced for? I don't know. I'm not going to suggest that they were, but there definitely was something majorly different in those two fields, and it was that observation kind of really caught my attention. That's one of the things that I puzzle over sometimes, is just what really was going on there, what was happening, what did we miss? So
right. So I mean, I clearly I don't claim understanding of much of anything, even beyond the vegetable production, but as you observe other aspects of many people's daily life in terms of what they buy, their transportation, their clothing, their music, their appliances, so on and so forth, I think a number of very successful companies recognize that, perhaps with vehicles, it's not just transportation, it's the feel that one has in the vehicle or when looking at the vehicle. Okay, there's something else going on, or the particular item of clothing or whatever it might be. I'm not trying to draw parallels between those directly, but I am wondering out loud if a fresh look at what is actually being offered for sale on the part of the grower in terms of the produce. A fresh look, meaning a buyer-informed look, would go a long way in helping them, day in and day out. And I know that they say, and because I've been part of those conversations. Look, I get that kind of feedback when I see what's left over at the stall, or when people come into the farm market and they pick what they pick, they don't pick, and I see what's left over. So I am getting that feedback. I say, I know, agreed. But are you actually asking them in any other way what they actually came in for? It's possible that they took something away simply because they had to. They didn't have enough time to make another stop, but they won't be back. Or they're not overly enthusiastic about what they took away. They took it because they had to. It was a matter of timing. But they're calculating in the back of their mind, well, this will not be my first destination. So they have an internal control on that day, at that time, at that point of sale. But do they really have a more comprehensive understanding of what the buyer was looking for? Maybe not. That comes with some real, if you will, sophisticated but focused attention to what the buyer is actually looking for, and more of that would help.
I'm as I'm listening, I'm wondering, are you asking the deeper question, perhaps, that what is the job that the buyer wants this food to do, such as does this food have a purpose of it needs to appear really well on the Thanksgiving dinner table, for example? Are you asking more about its purpose? It's kind of its greater purpose other than just nourishment?
Certainly, but I'm advocating more perhaps more mundanely, if you will, more day to day. What I'm advocating is for growers to be as informed about what their buyers would, one, expect as a minimum, but two, would aspire to as much as possible. Because remember, buyers have, especially those who are chefs, who are reselling the product, produce managers at grocery stores, intermediaries, if you will, and even some individual consumers, of course. They have aspirations too. They are hoping. We're here in this conversation, we're talking about how growers can grow and adapt. Well, so are other business people and individuals. They're growing and adapting. We see evidence of this, quite profoundly, and I can cite one here in just a moment. But for the grower to be in step with that market, that individual, that group, or to even sidestep them, if you will, make a parallel move and become more informed about another group, I think is only to their advantage. So wherever it leads, to be more informed about what the buyer is expecting right in the here and now and would reward later is only to the grower's advantage. Now, specific to a specific example, I'm part of a much larger team at Ohio State University that is involved with understanding or working to understand connections between diet and health, but particularly within a defined community of eaters, if you will, these being cancer survivors. And these are folks that have gone through their primary treatments and are now on the other side of that. And they are, a subset of them are being provided with access to freshly harvested fruits and vegetables, okay? They have an entirely different outlook on diet. Having gone through their treatment, their diagnosis and treatment, now having a different appreciation for and view on diet-health relationships, they have an entirely different view of what they will buy and what they will look for. And some of these folks, of course, are midlife and older. They have, and of course, they're not going through that scenario alone. They have family, they have friends. So my point here is that with their newfound or revitalized appreciation for diet health connections, and now focus on what they eat, are growers being a partner in that process? Are we taking any steps to connect with people who have a new interest in food? Or are we going to leave it to chance? Are we going to leave it to them going into their local store and talking to the produce manager or their restaurant or whatever it might be? Is it going to be just chance and the grower will get whatever comes their way? Or will growers be proactive in that process? And of course, when they're asked, can you grow a more nutritious product? Be able to say, yes, indeed, I can. And, it will have elevated levels of this, this, and this. because of course the dietetics, nutrition, and oncology community will have certain expectations of them. It isn't just like waving hands and saying it's more nutrient dense. No, there are specific bioactive compounds that matter. Will the growers know about those? And will they be able to manage their crop accordingly? You know, if we want to get to this higher plane, everyone needs to step up their game. Advisors, scientists, growers, we're all being asked to do more. But in that, there's greater opportunity as well, I think.
So I'd love to expand on that thought that you just expressed at the end. From your perspective, where is the greatest opportunity for growers today? Where's the greatest opportunity in agriculture? Where's the greatest opportunity to move to that next plateau?
Continue to do what they have done for many years very well, but do it better. We focus now on social implications of farming and farming systems and agriculture overall. We focus on the social component. That's very, very important. You know, so-called food equity, food access, food availability, food security, that aspect of food security. Be a partner in the process to some level in enhancing the social component of what they do, their farm, and be connected in some way. Secondly, environmentally. Yes, we ask a lot of growers. I mean, they have a lot of demands on them. They're supposed to do this, this, and this, and this, you know, and oh, by the way, you know, do it with these criteria, meet these criteria. But do one's level best to use the natural resources that are required to produce food well. Be a good steward of the earth, okay? Probably there will be rewards for that. One can be certified organic or not, but that's a choice. But be a good steward of the natural resources that are required to produce food. And then finally, as far as the economic piece, if you will, you know, be a steward of the farm in that, and a student of the farm in that. Of course, you're trying to run a business. You're trying to be successful at it. You're trying to have a generated income. And as many steps as can be taken in terms of understanding the market and enhancing perhaps the price that they get, you know, what would that involve? Be a student of it, explore it. I think those are possibly the greatest needs, if you will, or the greatest opportunity.
If you had to make one recommendation for growers to learn more about any of these various areas, if you had to recommend one book for people to read, what would that be?
Oh wow! Expecting that people will be coming at this, John, from different places. As maybe not one book so much as one step. Learn something new. Challenge yourself. If you've been listening to or watching or reading, you know, kind of information coming from one primary source, check a second one. Get an alternative point of view. Do not become too comfortable with what one knows to be, quote, true. Question healthily. And so, you know, if one is reading only, you know, if you will, the scientific literature, you know, hey, look at some other literature as well. If one has had no exposure to the scientific literature, no exposure to research, no exposure to that kind of information, I think it's high time to start. If one has never picked up a book describing the physiology of tomato or kale or whatever, I think it'd be a good time to do that. Challenge yourself to learn something new about your crop and or your farm.
Yeah, your earlier comment reminds me of a quote that I believe is attributed to Charlie Munger, where he describes the work required to have an opinion. And he says that in order for you to be allowed to have an opinion, you need to be able to articulate the opposing point of view better than the opposition.
Well, we see this in if you will, in some high school forensics, programs, speech and debate programs, where knowing the opposing point of view is essential, even though you're going to espouse, your point of view. To see the issue in the round is very, very important. And you're still free to make the choice to adopt one point of view or another, but to be familiar with the other or another, I think has become essential. And at least as an investigator, as an academic, that's kind of part and parcel of a career there, because we see how, as new data emerge, we have to revise our thinking on a topic, and academics are fairly adept at picking out folks who are operating with, quote, old thinking. I mean, it's just something you become, somewhat adept at. They're not up on the current information, so on and so forth. And, some of that is okay. It's acceptable. It's a challenge to remain up to date, but it's necessary. So I would say for farming, it's the same way. If a grower is not aware of some of the newest trends in technology, in what people respond to in terms of their food, like you said earlier, it's only a matter of time before that so-called ignorance or being unaware will perhaps have undesirable consequences.
Speaking of technology, what technology or ideas are you really excited about for the future of agriculture and believe hold a lot of untapped potential?
So some of those, given the types of operations I interact with most often, okay, I would say there are two sectors that are related. One is grower-friendly technology that can be implemented on the farm in terms of monitoring their environment and understanding the connections between that environment and their cropping outcome. So we call them sensors, data loggers, miniature temperature sensors, ones that will communicate with the grower through, for example, a cell phone or a computer if they have one. Those are interesting to me. Matched up with more computing power, if you will. I know that we have more computing power in a standard laptop that went on the Saturn rockets that went into space, and it seems like, well, isn't that enough? But I think it's the analytical capabilities that we're beginning to implement that will matter to growers going forward. I think there's a rather large untapped potential out there for growers who are connected to some types of databases and other resources that technology can bring to them that would inform their thinking. So, for example, I'll just ask the question, of a grower perhaps listening to this conversation. How much do they know about the people within a 50-mile radius of their farm regarding any factor that would influence their food choice? How much do they truly know? And it's not about prying and snooping on the internet. It's about understanding data about the demographics of the people around them. Understanding of those data more thoroughly may give them insights into how they could reach them. And when they reach them, what would be valuable to them as a vegetable, of somebody offering vegetable crops, for example. Is there a new ethnic population coming into the area that would be looking for a certain type of vegetable that grower could provide? Is there a new employer coming into the area? Is there an employer leaving the area? I mean, any number of factors that would influence food choice and where people interact with their food, particularly, if you will, vegetables, I think would be information that they could employ if they happen to be active in a local regional markets. Obviously, for people who are shipping all over the country, they're tracking this anyway. They have a hand in that to begin with.
Matt, we've covered a number of very intriguing topics, and I'd like to end with kind of an opening question. What is the one question you wish I would have asked? What's the piece that you would have loved to discuss in this conversation?
Goodness gracious, I've been so focused on what we have been talking about. At some point, if it would be useful, I'd like to return to the question of nutritional value and so-called nutrient density. It's a term that I call, and others have called, nutritional yield instead. That's a combination of the traditional yield, as we measure it, pounds per acre or what have you, times the nutrient value that it contains and concentration of this product or that metabolite or another metabolite. That's the metric that we have been using in some of our studies to understand if we can move the needle on nutritional yield, recognizing that for the moment, most growers are paid by the pound, right? And not so much by the nutritional value, but anticipating a time when the proportion of the price as a proportion of the normal yield and the nutritional value is changed. In other words, people value nutrition more highly. I'd like to ask, of growers, what are they hearing? What are they seeing from their customers regarding the role of nutrition or quality, flavor, texture, so on? I'd like to learn more from them to get a sense for whether or not my reading of the situation is accurate. And I think that we, in order to guide the work going forward.
Matt, I think this is a very intriguing conversation. I'd love to dig into it a little bit more deeply. I think that particularly that there's a couple of different questions here. There's obviously the question of food quality, but also from perhaps a macro perspective of needing to grow better nutrition, or I should say perhaps say more nutrition for a growing world population. Should we perhaps also begin measuring crop production in terms of protein content per acre or carbohydrate production per acre for what will actually be used as a food source? So what are your thoughts?
Some of that's already being done. Perhaps not much is being made of it publicly, but of course I call it the composition or the makeup of the major components of the food supply in the U.S. and Europe and other places. That's tracked. There are federal and state agencies that do that. It's mostly federal agencies that do that. That's what they're tasked to do. So we have some really capable people who are not only involved in creating those data, but also in analyzing those data. We can model, for example, what it would be, what the impact would be if we ate, as a population per capita, if we ate 1 pound less of meat per year, what that could mean in any number of ways. Or if the certain parameters, certain properties of the food supply went up by X percent, what could that mean from the standpoint of diet and health? We have some projections that way, and they're very intriguing. I would say that in as much as a grower would try to build part of their business around that process, look, I am acknowledging the day-to-day realities that most farmers appear to face. It's a huge challenge to do much of anything other than produce the crop using ways that are very familiar and reliable. So to add on to that, wow, you're asking me to become an expert in nutrition, and no. Just take a few steps forward in that direction to appreciate and understand where there might be a market opportunity for you to grow the business based on the quality of the crop and the markets that you're now trying to access. And so be, as much as you can, shape the market rather than only respond to the market, if you will. I think that's maybe a message that I didn't make very clear, and some may have already picked up on, is to whatever extent possible, create the desire, create the market, don't just respond to it. We're talking about a spectrum that way.
So how would I, as a grower, work to create the market? How can I shift the perspectives in the market?
You'd be informed as much as you could be with the time that you have and resources you have. You'd be as informed as possible, again, about some of the topics we covered, what people expect in the product, and be conversant in them so that when there's an opportunity to bring up the quality of the product that they're selling that can't be seen, if you will, and some of these nutritional parameters can't necessarily be seen, some can very well be seen. Color is a prime example of that. If you study up on the dietary recommendations as drawn by the dietetics, nutrition, and human health professional community, not the USDA alone, you see that color on the plate is enormously important, because from color comes so many benefits. Okay? And we have, in the fruit and vegetable world, we have obviously a huge palette of color opportunities. So to understand what it might take to provide a deeper red or a brighter yellow or a more penetrating blue or purple, and what that could mean nutritionally and from the standpoint of the flavor profile, we can't ignore that. And to be able to converse about that with the buyer might be useful. Understand where nutrition comes from, if you will. Nutrition is defined by, again, the people who study it directly, I would say.
Wonderful. Matt, this has been a very enjoyable conversation. I've been very honored to have you here on the show. Thank you for joining us, and I will look forward to perhaps expanding this conversation in a future show. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be on the show. Thank you.